Hey, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I hate to start anything late. Wasn't too long of a delay tonight, but it was about 7 minutes, 8 minutes late. Thank you for waiting, dealing with a household issue. So glad to be here with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're going to have another one of our great late night chats. Let's go. Let's do it.
Century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always a pleasure. I see a super chat has already come in, and I'm typing it down quickly here. Hold on. I'm just going to type it down, and you guys have been great with the super chats lately. The second half of our program has been astoundingly good lately. Millennials and the Zoomers, a lost generation. There we go. It's awesome to be here with all of you folks. Awesome. Yeah, we're just going to do another one of our chats tonight. The way we generally do things, for those of you who may not be aware, is that I give opening remarks, as I am doing right now. Just kind of tell you what's on my mind. Then from there, we do a roll call. We find out who it is on the other side of the camera, who's watching. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you would like me to talk about in the second half of our show, by all means, send me a super chat. We already wrote down the first one. That's what makes the second half of the show interesting and exciting. Few quick business announcements. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, go and watch the amazing documentary that Peter Coffin made about the Center for Political Innovation and our recent conference, the Summit Against Hypocrisy, opposing Joe Biden's propaganda show. It is just a beautiful, beautiful film. Beautiful film. Beautiful film, and Peter Coffin did an amazing job. The link is down below. The link is also here in the chat. Go and watch the amazing documentary that Peter Coffin made. Excellent piece of work. And if you like what we're doing, please join the Center for Political Innovation. We need people to join our organization. It's growing. Memberships have been coming in since the documentary premiered. A number of people saw it and liked what they saw. They want to be part of that community of people dedicated to anti-imperialism and 21st century socialism, trying to stand against the danger of a new world war and a low-wage police state. It's really great. It's really great what we're doing. And we have something very, very special on these streams. We have our inside jokes, and we're doing something really great. So thanks, everybody, for being a part of this. And I'm going to jump into my opening remarks for tonight. So I went to the gym today. Exercised. Try to do that as much as I can. Lately, I've been feeling spring allergies, so I haven't gone as much as I should have. But I went today. Did an evening workout before this stream. Did an evening workout, and then I ate my dinner, and then I got ready to do this stream. But while I was at the gym, I usually shower after I work out at the gym. After I did my arm thing, held my arms up for a while to build upper body strength, fixed posture. Then I got on the elliptical machine, and I guess with the allergies today, I only did about 40 minutes on the elliptical machine. Could have done longer, but I just, my body was just not having it, and the allergies, and I was hungry, and I just, I did 40 minutes. So then I went to go take a shower in the gym, which I really like doing. For a while, the COVID rules had it so you couldn't shower at the gym, and I didn't like that. I really didn't like that. I really like to be able to take a nice, refreshing shower after I exercise. I really like it. Really makes a big difference to be able to do that. It's very refreshing to just wash the sweat off of yourself. Another super chat, writing it down. What is RF in your question? Oh, Russian Federation. So there you go. I went to go take my shower, and while I was going to take my shower, women, it's a little bit different for all of you, right? Women, you just have toilets, but we men, in our men's rooms, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but you don't normally go into men's rooms. We have urinals, right? You have toilets that men sit on, and you have urinals that men stand and go to the bathroom on. It's kind of gross. But anyway, not exactly what I wanted to talk about on these streams, but I'm getting to a point. So anyway, in the men's room where you got your urinals and you got your toilets, right? Often men, because a lot of men stand in order to do their business, often the toilet seats on the toilets are up because men will use the toilets and stand in front of them like they would a urinal. So while I'm getting ready to get into the shower, I've got my towel around my waist. I've got my other towel in my hand, 2 gym towels, and I'm walking over to the shower ready to wash myself and clean the sweat off of my body from an exercise. One of my fellow gym exercising people, he apparently had to go number 2. None of my business. I didn't want to know this, but he felt a need for every single person in the locker room to be aware of the fact that he was going to go number 2, because he walked into the bathroom, walked into the stall, closed the door to the stall, and he took the seat that was up and slammed it down at the top at like kaboom. Kaboom. I swear, it annoys the hell out of me when people do that. There is no reason. If you're putting the seat down in the bathroom, there's no reason to boom. And, the toilet is ceramic and the seat is heavy plastic and it's bam. And it just makes such a loud fucking noise. Why do people do this? Does it bring them pleasure in some way? I don't get it. It's really annoying. It has annoyed me for a really long time, especially when you're trying to calm down, if you're trying to go to the bathroom yourself, or you're trying to take a shower, and somebody just wants to prove their masculinity. Kaboom! Why? Why? And I mean, toilets are ceramic. They could break, for Christ's sakes. I mean, it's like, I don't get it. I really don't get why men feel a need. Most men don't do this. Most men do not do this. But they take that toilet seat that's up and they slam it. And they make the loud, it like echoes through the room. It's like, bam. And it like deafens you for a moment. It is the most annoying, rude thing. I do not understand why people do this. You don't have, I mean, maybe they don't want to touch the toilet seat, Caleb, someone says. Okay. no one's saying you have to touch it. You can gently, these things, they have hinges. You can just gently nudge it and it'll fall down, right? But there's no reason to kabam the toilet seat every time you put it down, right? If you're in a men's room, the toilet seats are going to be up. You wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. You're in a men's room, you're probably going to have to touch a toilet seat at some point, okay? And maybe you don't like that. That's why we wash our hands afterwards. But boom. I mean, it annoys me. But it fits in with a certain pattern of behavior, right? It's not just that. There are some people, some men in particular. This is why I will say the synthetic left is not entirely wrong when they talk about toxic masculinity. Now, to be fair, I think there is toxic femininity, and toxic masculinity is not the root of all of our problems. But when people talk about toxic masculinity, as much as their interpretation of it, I mean, obviously that's not why we have school shootings. Obviously, that's not the cause of all wars and violence and injustice in the world. Obviously, the answer isn't just shaming white men. But toxic masculinity does exist. That guy slamming that down, that's toxic masculinity, right? And I know what it is, right? And that's why it annoys me. It annoys me more because I know why he's doing it. He feels like if he can annoy everyone else in the room, somehow he's become a better person. He's become a stronger person. And that annoys the crap out of me, right? The way to gain points, to get people to like you, to move ahead in the world, is not to piss everyone around you off. But there are some men that have never gotten this memo, right? They've never gotten this memo. They think that if I can annoy everyone, because we're not going to, I didn't do anything, right? I don't want to have a big argument at the gym. I was annoyed. Everyone else in the gym, in the locker room, was probably annoyed by him bamming the toilet seat down. We're not going to say anything because we don't want to have a fight at the gym, right? And so it's he feels yeah, I just annoyed everyone in the room. I'm a big man. That's how I can prove I'm tough. I annoyed everybody. No one said nothing to me. Yeah, I annoyed everyone. It's yeah, we all don't like you now. We all don't like you. I mean, and I swear there are a lot of men who think that is a way to get ahead, that they've got something. They walk out of there just full of themselves. All right, I annoyed people. And I don't just see it in the locker room, right? I mean, locker rooms are a classic male atmosphere for people to act this way. What do we got here? I see this other places, right? One place I see this is on the subways. I see this a lot. There's two examples of this that I've experienced many, many times on New York City subways. One of them is the guy gets on the subway with his phone. He has headphones, or he doesn't have headphones. I don't know what it is, with music on his phone. Usually rap music, but sometimes it's heavy metal music. Sometimes he's playing a video game, but he pumps the sound on his phone as loud as he possibly can. And he walks into the subway with the music on his phone cranked up. And it's dude, we don't all want to listen to your music. Headphones, I'm listening to music on my headphones. Other people have headphones. Just get some headphones. But he doesn't do that. Right? And he actually cranks the music up as loud as he possibly can. And then while he's got his phone with the loud music playing on it, he's constantly looking at everyone oh, you going to do something? You going to say something to me? And somebody occasionally will. It's not me. I've learned that there's no point, because that's what they want. That's why they're doing it. It's a game. And so someone says, can you please turn it down? And then he goes, oh, you want to fight with me? You want to? And he gets all provocative, he wants to have a fight. Right? And that's his great achievement, is that he annoyed the crap out of everyone in the subway car by having his video game music or his rap music or his heavy metal music on his phone really, really loud. And he's constantly looking through the subway, looking for someone to fight with him about it. He wants someone to fight with him. Somebody will take the bait, and then he like jumps up like he's ready to rumble with them. It's a really annoying behavior. A really annoying behavior. Another version of that I've seen is, and this has happened to me. I have been in subway cars where this has happened probably 7 or 8 times, right? This has happened where I've been in a subway car, and I'm always amazed by how long it goes on. And it'll be 2 guys will get in the subway together. They're like friends, and they're talking. And it'll be one friend who's just like really pumped up and angry at someone. And for the entire train ride, 40 minutes, I'll get on the train in Brooklyn. I get off the train in Midtown Manhattan. For 40 minutes, the one friend will be talking about how he's going to mess up or beat up or fight this other person. And everyone in the train car will be impressed with how long the guy goes on about it, right? He'll be talking to his friend and he'll just be yelling and he'll be like, I'm going to mess that guy up. I'm going to find him. I'm going to beat the shit out of him. He doesn't know who he's messing with. He's going to shoot them. He's going to fight him because he's tough, and we all just sit there. And for 40 minutes, the guy will rant and rave about how tough he is and how this person, we don't even know who the person is. And the other friend is probably just like nodding, like, uh-huh. And for 40 minutes on the train ride, we will sit and listen to this guy go on about how he is going to fight somebody, how somebody was disrespecting him. He's going to jump them. He's going to mess them up. He's going to get them. And it's like he's showing off for the whole train. He's trying to prove to the whole train that he's just a really masculine guy. But he's actually just annoying the hell out of everybody. Like, no one cares. Like, it was kind of amusing for the first 5 minutes or so, but and often it's very repetitive, right? It's often very, very repetitive. He doesn't have much material, right? If he was to describe like how he was going to beat this guy up, if he's always he's going to shoot the guy. Well, he's like, what kind of gun he's going to use? Maybe it might get interesting. Like, is he doing marksmanship training to learn exactly how to shoot the guy? Is he planning to like buy some fancy brass knuckles? It could get interesting, but it never gets any interesting. It's just the same words over and over again. The MF word usually is in there. The person, he's describing he's going to mess them up. He's going to F them up. He's going to take them out, and it doesn't get interesting. And and how do they do it for 40 minutes? On 7 or 8 different times, I have sat there in a train car and listened for 40 minutes to the guy telling his friend about and telling the whole train car, and he gets really worked up. I mean, he gets his hands into it and he's yelling and, and about how he's gonna mess up, he's gonna mess up, he's gonna kill, he's gonna fuck up whoever he's mad at. And we all just have to sit there and listen to it. And like I said, he could at least make it interesting, right? I mean, he could at least he could make it interesting for us. He could, I would, if I ever felt a need to do that, which I doubt I would make it interesting. I would say, I'm going to shoot that motherfucker. And I would say, and I'm going to buy this kind of gun. And I've been practicing this way. And I considered buying this other type of gun, but I was like, no. And I would throw some jokes in there. I would explain why I'm so mad at the motherfucker. I wouldn't just say he was dissing me. I would tell a story. I'd go into great detail. I would tell why I'm mad at this person. I would get the whole train car also mad at this guy, right? I would get them all mad. I would have them all come. I'm just kidding. But I'm having fun here, right? But it's a thing that annoys me. Is when people feel that and the other thing that I fit in with this doesn't go on subway cars. This doesn't happen in locker rooms. This happens on the street. Loud motors. Okay. That also annoys me, right? I'm walking down the street in my neighborhood. It's a lovely afternoon. Cars go by, truck goes by, cars go by, but then a fancy car, very fancy car, goes by, and this car has no muffler. I do not, and it's like, it's like the loudest sound in the world. It's the loudest sound you've ever heard. It's like, and it's like, it kills me. I'm like thankful when that car gets out of sight. I'm like, Jesus. And the car goes by. I'm just like, oh, thank God. But the guy who's driving the car always has the most satisfied look on his face that he's driving a car that is really fucking loud. And I always wonder, like, okay, it annoyed me for 2 seconds when it went by, right? I was just enjoying my day. Maybe I had my headphones in. Maybe I was walking to the store to buy some orange juice or some unnamed diet beverage or some flowers for my beautiful wife. And, I'm just walking to the store and then, all of a sudden, like the loudest car in the world speeds by me. And everyone around me looks up and jumps because the loudest car in the world just sped by me. And it's always going way faster than the speed limit. And it's like, and we all jump. And the guy is always like, yeah. And the funny thing is, like, he annoyed me for 2 seconds. But he has to sit there in the car. I would never get in one of those cars because that sound, like, it goes away in 2 seconds. He goes right by. Okay. But that engine noise that annoys the crap out of me, it stays with him. He speeds down the road. The whole time he's driving his car, he hears it. Why would you do this? Mufflers were invented for a reason, but he's doing it to annoy people. It's like he gets this thrill. Yeah. The more details you give, it's pretty meta. Exactly. There you go. Maybe these guys had legal advice before they were yelling at the train about how they're going to mess up a motherfucker. But they had legal advice. Their attorneys told them to just repeat the same thing over and over again. That's what it is. You got it, DNB. You got it. They had legal advice in their subway rants. I never thought of that. Wow. Ask an attorney. If you're going to shoot somebody and before you shoot them, you rant at a subway car for 40 minutes about why, don't go into detail. But anyway, I'm being silly but anyway, the reason I wanted to talk about all of this, right? Obviously I'm making the point that is toxic masculinity and it's annoying, right? It's annoying. And so when the synthetic left talks about toxic masculinity, they're not 100% wrong. I would say they're like 90% wrong. They're 90% wrong, but they're getting at something. They're getting at something. And that's what I want to talk to you all about tonight, actually. Kinky thinks I'm high. Kinky says, Caleb finally did a doobie. No, I didn't, Kinky. No, I didn't. But there you go. I'm in that kind of mood. Whatever. I'm just kind of having fun. I'm having fun. I got complaining and it's fun what we do here. All of you are fun and we're laughing about this. But anyway, this gets me to the point that I'm trying to make on tonight's stream, which is that there is one thing that I think all of us who engage in this kind of politics need to recognize, which is the power of bullshit and the power of realizing that something's bullshit and how that can kind of mess with you. Because we just had tonight, yet another confirmation. What is it? The Durham report now? Russiagate is bullshit. Russiagate is bullshit. The idea that Donald Trump took office because of a vast plot involving Vladimir Putin and that Donald Trump is a fascist and Russia is fascist, and together they teamed up and rigged the American elections in order to bring fascism and white supremacy to America and to take away the American people's freedom, and it didn't happen. It did not happen. And we have been told this over and over and over. Russiagate is bullshit. It's bullshit. And a lot of people have to realize Russiagate is bullshit at this point. Now, a lot of people just refuse to acknowledge that it's bullshit. And that if you can realize that one thing that is pushed really, really hard, that is repeated as fact, that is just pounded into your head, is bullshit, That can be a very, very powerful thing. Russiagate is bullshit. And if people are thinking people, and they come to realize that Russiagate is bullshit, they should realize it's not just Russiagate that's bullshit. The forces that insisted that Russiagate was not bullshit, the forces that kept Russiagate going after the numerous examples of it being bullshit, those forces are lying to you. They're discrediting you. There is conscious deception going on. Russiagate was pushed to serve a political agenda, and that political agenda that pushed a falsehood also is based in falsehood. And then when you see something that is so widely pushed in the culture as Russiagate was really pushed hard. It was pushed really, really hard. I mean, it was Rachel Maddow. Every single episode was all about Russiagate, Putin, rigged our elections, Russian conspiracy. And it's all bullshit. The FBI should never have even investigated it, we now find out. There was no grounds even for an FBI investigation of it. The whole thing was just pure bullshit. It was just pure bullshit. The whole thing was just pure and utter bullshit. It was nonsense, right? It was just nonsense. The whole thing was utter nonsense. And when you realize that all the voices that are supposed to be pointed to as purveyors of truth, the US government, the US media, prominent academics, the New York Times, they were all pushing something that the more you dig into it was bullshit, that Van Jones was recorded saying it was a big nothing burger. Everyone could tell the whole thing was just bullshit. The idea that Russia was responsible for Donald Trump's win, that there was some massive conspiracy because some memes got posted on some website, it was all bullshit. We knew it from the beginning. We knew it from the beginning. And sometimes the levels of obvious bullshit just got to be ridiculously cringe. Ridiculously cringe. I will never forget a clip I saw of Rachel Maddow where she said, imagine that America had interfered in a Russian election this way. And I heard her say that and I wanted to shake my television. The 1996 election in Russia, in which Boris Yeltsin was reelected, was rigged. And the USA bragged about how hard they made sure to make sure that Boris Yeltsin was reelected. Bill Clinton openly campaigned for Boris Yeltsin. There was a whole documentary all about how the United States interfered in the 1996 elections in Russia to make sure Boris Yeltsin got reelected. And Rachel Maddow, imagine. And it's like the United States interferes in elections all over the world. There's that famous clip of Andrew Yang sitting with Rachel Maddow. And he's sitting there with Rachel Maddow. And he says, Russia interfered in our elections, but, America's interfered in elections too. And, I think it needs to stop all around. She says, where has America ever interfered in an election? And he's like, I think you can think of a few places. She's like, name one. And he's like, south of the border. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it's just utter. I mean, the amount of deception that you had to just be a complete establishment shill to believe in Russiagate. The idea that Russia was somehow, involved in, in manipulating the U.S. elections, and it was this big scandal we had to investigate, that some Russian hot dog company had bought 3 ads on Facebook, and that, it was such bullshit. The whole thing was just bullshit. But there you go. And it's like realizing that bullshit is pushed from the highest levels of power is very powerful. And that can be a place that people wake up, but you have to be careful with this. You have to be very, very careful. For me, what really made me a communist, I'll just tell you a little bit about my journey to becoming a communist. And I was a kid, lived in a really small town, mostly Republicans. My family were Democrats. My mother was very religious. My dad, not so much. Little town. And as I get to like 5th grade or whatever, I had never heard of communism before, but I learned what it was. Learned what the Russian Revolution were, what the communists, what the Bolsheviks were. I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was a very interesting idea. I really didn't know what it was. I was told it meant everyone shares everything. It's the idea that everyone should get paid the same no matter how hard they work. But it was like these people, they wanted to have a revolution to make sure that everybody was equal or something like that. It seemed interesting, but everyone said it was bad, but it seemed interesting to me. I remember I went to the library, got a copy of the Communist Manifesto when I was in 5th grade, opened it, started reading it, couldn't make heads or tails of it, but the tone sounded exciting. Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your change. It seemed exciting. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Was the bourgeoisie and discovering North America or something. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. But the tone of it I liked. I liked the aesthetics, the red flag. It all seemed really exciting, but it was bad. But everyone knew it was bad. And I remember I was riding in a car. My family, we were driving from Ohio to visit my grandparents in Missouri, and I was riding in the car, looking out the window. We're passing many, many cornfields and all of that. And I started thinking in my head, what if there was a way we could do communism? What if there was a way that we could have a society where people were taken care of? And I started thinking, like, what if, I just started thinking that way. It was interesting to me. I just started thinking, well, maybe there's something to this communism stuff. But I still believed what everyone told me about Cuba being evil and about the Soviet Union having failed because it didn't work. And I just remember it was kind of vague. And I remember I was thinking about Christianity a lot and God's kingdom on earth and stuff like that. It just started to appeal to me, like, maybe there's something to this communism stuff. Maybe there's something to it. But what really ultimately was the turning point was, as I started thinking, okay, maybe there's something to it, was when I got my hands on the book Revolution Betrayed by Leon Trotsky. The book Revolution Betrayed by Leon Trotsky is Leon Trotsky's magnum opus. It's his big book explaining his critique of the Soviet Union. My understanding, I've been told by many people, it's some of this wisdom from the Workers' World Party. They say Trotsky didn't want it to have that name. Trotsky, that it was called The Revolution Betrayed. What is the Soviet Union and where is it going? And what I was told many times, I don't know if this is true. This is a Marcyism. This is something Sam Marcy said. I don't know if it's true, honestly. I've never been able to find any documentation of this. But the Workers' World Party taught that Trotsky did not want that to be the name of the book. He wanted the book to just be called, What is the Soviet Union and Where is it Going? That's what he wanted it to be called, but they gave it the name The Revolution Betrayed, I'm told, because it was a catchy name. But regardless, that was Trotsky's magnum opus. I got my hands on it. I'd never met another communist. I knew Trotsky was a guy who Stalin killed. Trotsky was against the Soviet Union. And his book was called The Revolution Betrayed. And it was going to explain how the Soviet Union got it wrong. And maybe through reading this, I could find a way that communism might actually work. That's what I thought. So I opened The Revolution Betrayed, expecting to find, expecting that I would learn from this book why the Soviet Union was evil like everyone said, and why, how communism could be implemented in a different way that wouldn't be so awful. And the first chapter of The Revolution Betrayed, the very first chapter, is called What Has Been Achieved? And Trotsky was writing this book in the late 30s. The Soviet Union is having an economic boom while the rest of the world's having a Great Depression. And so he acknowledges what was widely understood economic fact during that time, which is the Soviet Union was doing pretty damn well. It built a modern steel industry. It built a modern farming system. It built the biggest power plants in the world. It's just all this statistics and data about the Soviet Union's astronomical, amazing economic achievements. And I'm sitting there as, fifth, sixth grade, and I'm reading this, and I'm like, this can't be true. This can't be true, because everyone knows that communism never worked anywhere. That's what everyone said. Communism never had any economic successes. Communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. This can't be true. And I'm reading just page after page from Trotsky, from a guy that Stalin killed. The title of the book is The Revolution Betrayed. It's an anti-Soviet book. It's an anti-Stalin, anti-communist book. But yet I'm reading page after page of economic data, statistics showing that socialism actually does work as an economic system. And I thought, well, this can't be true. So what did I do? I went to the encyclopedia. Back then, they had these things called the encyclopedias, these big volumes of books. And I went to the section on the Soviet Union. And I read the part about the Soviet economy. And it confirmed, yes, the Soviet Union did rapidly industrialize the country. Yes, the Soviet Union did lift millions of people out of poverty. Yes, the Soviet Union did have the world's biggest power plants in the world. Yes, the Soviet Union did have the world's biggest steel mills in the world. Now, it said other things, like the Soviet Union violated human rights. They had these gulag prison camps. Stalin was an evil dictator. It said all of that, but it also acknowledged, yeah, actually, socialism did, in the Soviet Union, result in a huge rise in living standards, a huge increase in life expectancy, access to medical care, electrification, infant mortality rates decreasing, literacy becoming universal, like all of these basic economic statistics showed that the Soviet Union actually did have economic successes. And when I saw that in the encyclopedia, I got angry. That made me angry. Because what everybody knew about communism wasn't true. And so then, from then on, whenever the topic of communism came up, and people said that didn't work, I'd say, yes, it did. I'd say, who invented space travel? I'd say, who were the first people in space? Who defeated Hitler? And I would just start talking about this data. And what did people say to me? They said, oh, did the Holocaust also not happen? I said, what do you mean? They said, well, saying anything good about Stalin is the same as saying anything good about Hitler. So saying that Stalin, raised people out of poverty, that'd be like saying the Holocaust didn't happen. And I said, well, I never said the Holocaust didn't happen. All I said, but it's like that was the stigma. And people would get scared. That's what I noticed. It wasn't that people had any data to counter what I was saying. And even when I went to college, I would have these arguments with professors, and they would admit that I was correct. But it was this thing that we must not ever acknowledge. It's this thing that, yes, we know it's true, but it's not important because of gulags. It's not important because of Stalin. It's not important because of... We just don't acknowledge that. And it's like, no, the entire premise of anti-communism, the idea that communism just doesn't work, human nature, this thing that everybody knows, it's bullshit. It's utter bullshit. It's just bullshit. It's not true. Some things are true and some things are not. The Soviet Union had no economic successes is not true. It's false. It's fake. It's fake news. And basic economic data will show you this. Measurements of GDP growth, any measurement of the Soviet Union and its economic successes, any economic statistics about steel production, about electrification, about life expectancy, about infant mortality, about literacy will show you that at the time of communist leadership in Russia, living standards went up. The economy went up. The GDP went up. There was a huge increase. The very premise of anti-communism is wrong. Anti-communism is one big fat lie. And if people had just said to me, well, Caleb, the Soviet Union violated human rights, I would never have become a communist. If people had just said to me, well, Caleb, the Soviet Union had problems, I would never have become a communist. But I was told what everybody knew about communism. Everybody knew this. It was just a fact. It was an undisputed fact. Communism never had any economic successes. It doesn't work because of economics. It just doesn't work because of economics. And the reason it doesn't work doesn't even make any sense. The reason it doesn't work is because in communism, everyone gets paid the same wage, which no, they don't. And so then people lose incentive to work because of human nature, and so it falls apart. That's what everybody knew about communism. That's what everyone knew about it. That was just fact, that communism is this system where everyone gets paid the same wage. And it doesn't work then because people have no incentive to work. And the Soviet Union had no successes because of this, because, everyone didn't want to work, and so it fell apart. It's like 3 strikes and you're out. Like no one had any idea what the fuck they were talking about. Communism is not the idea that everyone should get paid the same wage. That's false. The goal is a centrally planned socialist economy, eventually leading to a world with vast abundance. And communism is not contrary to human nature because people do want to have more than they already have. And socialist societies tend to reward people for working harder, Stakhanovism, etc. And when there's abundance, people tend to get along better. That's the ultimate goal. And in a state of vast abundance, it's not contrary to human behavior. Humans act differently in different economic circumstances. So the whole human nature thing, that's bullshit. And then the final part, the Soviet Union, is proof of this because it fell and that they never had any economic successes ever. That's just complete bullshit. That's just complete bullshit. It's like you're wrong on 3 points here. You're just completely wrong. Like everything I was told about communism was just complete bullshit. It's just complete bullshit. And realizing that for me was like a huge alarm bell. But what I also noticed was that I knew more than people did. By just opening the encyclopedia, by opening Trotsky's book, Revolution Betrayed, by opening the encyclopedia, I suddenly knew more than most people did about communism. Most people that talked to me about communism had never heard the phrase means of production. They had no idea of the proletariat, the bourgeoisie. They were just told, well, communism is this idea we have a dictator who makes everything fair, and it's bad. No one knew anything about it. No one had any clue what they were fucking talking about. Everyone just knew, well, communism is bad, and it didn't work. And when you showed them, it actually did work. And Cuba has a higher life expectancy than most countries in South and Central America. And China, under the leadership of the Communist Party, has had huge living standards. What did people do? They got scared. They just got scared. No, that has to be wrong. That can't be true. No, I can't hear this. I can't hear this. This. They just get scared. They just get scared. And my response to seeing that was to get very angry. To get very, very angry. It's so funny. Trotsky made me a Stalinist. I mean, it's a long, complicated, that's a whole long, complicated story. But I would never have thought about being a Stalinist if it hadn't been for Trotsky. Because Trotsky, at the time in the 1930s, no one disputed that. Everyone acknowledged the Soviet Union's economic successes. But in the world that I grew up in the 1990s, it was just a fact that everybody knew communism never achieved anything. And that was just such an outlandish lie. And then to see that people get scared, I thought we were free in America. To see the way people got scared, they're afraid of thinking. Because everyone knew communism's bad. Communism's bad was the American government position. Communism's bad was the line of the American media. And there are social consequences if you go against that. So everyone was pretending something was true that was false, that everybody knew was false. Everybody knew was false, but everyone was pretending it was true out of fear. And that goes against everything I'd always been taught about America, because America is the land of the free. You can think whatever you want in America. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of the press and freedom. And it's this free. We're just this free country where everyone's free and can do whatever they want, and freedom. And we're clearly not. Clearly not. The people are so scared that they can't bring themselves to acknowledge basic economic data because of the social consequences. They're afraid they'll lose their job. They're afraid they'll, think about it, right? If I was in class and raised my hand, I would always argue with teachers. I realize now, those teachers, if they were to say, yes, actually, you're right, Caleb, the Soviet Union had big economic successes, they could get fired. Imagine what would happen, the parent calls up, Mr. Joe Bob, the teacher was telling the students communism was good. Oh my God, we can't have that at our school. He could lose his job. Think about it. Right? I mean, there was a time in U.S. history where people actually went to jail for saying these kinds of things. This goes to show you that it's bullshit. But one of the dangers, and this is what I want to warn you about. Just because society overall is wrong about something, creates a danger. I should back up. I can phrase that a little bit differently. When society is deeply wrong about something, they're just deeply wrong about something, the danger, when you realize that, is that you will fixate on that something. You will fixate on that something and ignore the big picture. And I see this a lot. Honestly, in everything that is alternative, and I'll just tell you this, I'm not going to go into huge detail about this. In everything that is outside the mainstream and everything that is fringe in the United States, there is at least one silver lining, one truth that society refuses to recognize. And that's why this fringe whatever exists. We're talking everything, right? Obscure religions, conspiracy theories, mystical beliefs, alternative political ideologies. All of those groups have something they can hang their hat on that is true, that nobody dares talk about. Or else they wouldn't exist. There is something in all of the idea, there's something they can point to that everyone just refuses to acknowledge. But the danger is that people lose themselves in that, which is what I kind of did for a while. It took me a long time. Because based on seeing that I had been lied to about communism, and based on seeing what everybody knew about communism was just wrong, and the rage and the anger that caused me, based on that, it took me a long time to be able to understand what went on in the 20th century, to understand why the Soviet Union fell, to understand why China and Deng Xiaoping theory is so important, to understand why we have Bolivarian socialism in Latin America now. We have Ba'athist Arab socialism in the Middle East, that the global communist movement has changed from what it was in the 20th century. It took me a long time because I was so caught up in what I was told was a lie. I was so caught up in that I couldn't see the bigger picture. And it took me actually visiting anti-imperialist countries, going to Iran a bunch, going to Venezuela and talking to people, going to global communist gatherings, that I kind of came out of this bubble of isolation that I had gotten myself into that was based on going, they lied to me. I'm right. Communism was very successful in the Soviet Union, and they're wrong when they say that it wasn't. And that is a truth you can hang your hat on. Sorry, some things are true and some things are not, and communism never had any success. It's never been successful economically. It fails because of human nature. That is bullshit. That is bullshit. If there's ever been bullshit before, that is bullshit. Stalin's 5-year economic plans, it was proved it was bullshit. And then Cuba proved it was bullshit. And Libya, under the leadership of Gaddafi, with the highest life expectancy on the African continent, proved it was bullshit. And Abdel Nasser building the world's largest biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the Middle East with the help of the Soviet Union proved it was bullshit. And China, and the Soviet space program. And it's like you can go on and on and on and on. I mean, I had a list at one point of big things built by communists, of some of the biggest things in the world, and communists built them, but there's more to the story than that. And that's where people get lost, right? And I've noticed that with everything that is alternative, there's something that people in that community, in that alternative world, can point to that society at large refuses to acknowledge that is true. But a lot of times they then lose themselves in that. They lose their ability to think objectively because of this. And that can be a danger. You fall into a dualistic mindset, black and white. And that's how I thought for a while. I thought, well, okay, Stalin clearly had huge economic successes. We need to do exactly what the Soviet Union did. And the reason the Soviet Union fell is because it deviated from the true communist way. They were having market reforms in the 80s and communism. And that's not a correct view. I don't take that view anymore. But I took that view because I was reacting to the lie, the falsehood that all of society had. But there's a reason that Deng Xiaoping did his market reforms. There's a reason that Bolivarian socialism is rising in Latin America. There's a reason that North Korea and Cuba are adjusting the way they're doing. And if you get stuck in either communism worked or it didn't, you can't understand the intricacy. The world is much more complicated than this. It's not yes or no. It's, did the Soviet Union work? Yes. Are they lying and when they say it didn't? Yes. However, did the Soviet Union have problems? Yes. Did the Soviet Union need to adjust? Yes. Were they able to do so? No. Was China able to do so? Yes. As China had big successes? Yes. Did Putin fix Russia by following, and modeling a lot of what Russia did on Deng Xiaoping and on studying the economic reforms of China? Yes. The Bolivarian socialist movement, is there a reason that they are having success, not the old ML parties? Yes. There are things that you can learn, but it's hard to learn those things when you get stuck in a dualism. And I've noticed that this is a certain pattern of thinking. And that our society, for whatever reason, and probably all societies, okay? Let's just be real here. I think all societies have inconvenient truths. Things that are true that the society at large just pretends aren't. I think every society does that to some degree or other. And for those of us who are very serious and really want to change the world and really want to improve things and think about things with any level of depth, for those of us who want to discover truth, we find those things and it annoys us. And so the way the rulers, and this is what you have to remember, the way the rulers siphon us off, I am convinced, the way they push us into isolation is they get us into a mindset Goodness gracious. These microphones, I tell you, I'm trying to get my Yeti mic back on. Goodness gracious. The rulers get us into a mindset. There we go. The rulers get us into a mindset where we can acknowledge our truth. We can acknowledge the thing that society doesn't want to acknowledge. We can acknowledge the forbidden truth as long as we use that forbidden truth to isolate ourselves. As long as we use that forbidden truth to find a little corner of society where nobody will come near us except for people that are highly alienated. And with our little truth that society doesn't acknowledge, we can just exist on the fringe, on the corner of society as a group of people that are at odds with society, screaming that society is wrong, it lied, right? And as long as we do that, it's fine. And I think that's what our leaders have kind of figured out. And it's brilliant. They've created a dualism. So it's like, okay, Caleb, you say communism was economically quite successful. And so that puts you at odds with the rest of society. You can do that. That you can be in this tiny, isolated group that burns the American flag, that has no influence whatsoever, that exists on the sidelines, screaming and yelling about how anti-communism's a lie, and you can just be this fringe, irrelevant person, because remember, your whole mindset is you have to be at odds with the rest of society, right? They lied to you, and you discovered that it's all a big lie. So you need to be at odds with all of society. You need to isolate yourself. You need to be a fringe element. You need to build a tiny little sect of people that are isolated, people that are socially awkward, people that are misfits, and you can exist in your little isolated corner screaming that American society is premised on a lie. And that's fine. And you can do that. That's what they want. That's what they would like us communists to do. And that's the trap we shouldn't fall into. We should not fall into that trap because that's very convenient for them. It's very convenient for them. We have to be smarter than this. We have to find a way not to step into this trap. We have to find a way that we can point out the forbidden truth and know the forbidden truth, but also make ourselves relevant. Carry out a function. Intervene in real struggles that are taking place within society. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. In a way, we're not really threatening the society. Because if they create an orthodoxy where people just won't acknowledge something, and we, a small minority of people, won't go along with this orthodoxy that they've created, if that's all they've got, they've won. But the struggle is to make yourself relevant. The struggle is to find cracks where you can insert yourself. The struggle is to understand the contending social forces and the contradictions within your society and use what you know, which is not just that the society you live in is wrong and premised on lies, but what you know about how the world actually works and how things actually change and how mass movements are created and how societies have changed over time. It is a struggle to insert yourself into the cracks, align yourself with really existing trends, position yourself on the side of real contradictions in your society, and utilize your position and the momentum that already exists to make yourself very relevant and make the knowledge that you have very relevant to what's going on. That is what we are striving to do. And it's taken me years to kind of understand this. It's taken me years to get this. And part of the reason I'm so hated by certain people is because of the same reason people in my small town hated me for saying that communism works. It's inconvenient, right? It's inconvenient to have to acknowledge that the Soviet Union works. It's also inconvenient to point out that at this point, the left are the main danger. Because what is convenient for socialists and leftists in America is to do what they've always done. Follow the Democratic Party and fight the Republicans. And Republicans scream anti-communism, and Democrats claim that they care about racism, claim that they care about women's rights, claim to support labor unions. So it makes sense to do what leftists in this country, which kind of made sense in the 70s and 80s, to be honest, made sense during the Cold War, which is to just follow the Democrats. The Democrats are more friendly toward communism, and the Republicans are more hostile toward communism. And especially now, the Democrats have the upper hand, and they've got lots of foundation money to pay for people to do activism for the causes that the Democrats promote. It's just more convenient. It's convenient. Caleb, why are you ruining this for us? For years, we've been following what the Democrats are doing. We've been building the movement. For years, we've been fighting against Republicans. And now, for once, the Democrats have the upper hand. There's more money to do this than there used to ever be. It used to be much harder to get funding to have protests about police brutality or racism or have workshops about women's empowerment or LGBT. It used to be so hard. Well, now it's much easier. So why are you ruining this for us, Caleb? Why are you continuing to bring up and acknowledge inconvenient truths? Why are you doing that? Well, that's because you're not really a leftist. You're not really a socialist, Caleb. You must be a Nazi. You must be a Nazi. Republicans are Nazis. And you're pointing out that actually the Trump people are more anti-war and more against the deep state. So you must be a Trump person. So you must be a Nazi. All right, problem solved. Right? It's just like the people in my little town that said, well, the Soviet Union didn't have any economic successes. Oh, it did. Well, that's just communist propaganda. It's the same thing. I'm sitting here telling you that there's an inconvenient truth you must acknowledge, which is at this time, the war party is the Democrat Party. The FBI political repression party is the Democrat Party. The party that is jailing the African People's Socialist Party, the African People's Socialist Uhuru movement, is the Democrat Party. Go down the line. The party that supports tech censorship is the Democrat Party. The party that's promoting degrowth and Malthusian overpopulation bullshit, the party that's promoting austerity is the Democrat Party. And they dress it up in anti-racist, anti-sexist, women's LGBT woke, blah, blah. They dress it up in all this song and dance that sounds left. But at the end of the day, average working class Americans are seeing their living standards go down, are mad at the low-wage police state, are opposing these wars, and the main place that dissidents at this point are going is toward Republican or conservative or MAGA circles. So much so that Minister Farrakhan even spoke positively of Donald Trump during the 2016 election. Did not endorse him, but spoke positively of him. So much so that Tucker Carlson, a Republican host, defended the Uhuru movement against the indictment. Glenn Beck spoke up while the left has been silent. So much so that Rage Against the War Machine, February 19th, was a really important anti-war rally. It was the biggest anti-war rally that's happened in 30 years. And the reason it was the biggest anti-war rally that's happened in, I shouldn't say 30 years, 20 years, is because it wasn't run by the left. The left anti-war movement is dead because all the leftists have turned into Democrats. But most Americans that have anti-war and anti-imperialist sentiments are moving in the libertarian or Republican direction. And this is an inconvenient truth. But if you're a real communist, meaning that you are aligned with Cuba, you are aligned with China, you're aligned with People's Korea, you're aligned with the American working class and want to dismantle imperialism, you should not be pivoting toward Biden. You should be pivoting toward the people, not Trump himself, but the people that are rallying in opposition to Biden. You should be pivoting toward aligning yourself with the forces that oppose Joe Biden, not the forces that are defending Joe Biden. But that's inconvenient. But if you're serious, your goal is not to just do a little isolated hustle. Your goal is not to just exist on the margins of society, being angry at society like old man yells at cloud. And that's what PSL is. That's what CPUSA is. That's what the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Workers' World Party, the Socialist Alternative, that's what they are. They're fringe, they exist on the edge of society, and they're going, this is a capitalist country, and it's not revolutionary. And the Democrats find them useful. Help them have rallies against police brutality. Help them have rallies against LGBT discrimination. They can show those rallies on CNN to build the case that Trump is a monster. And they exist in isolation. And they exist as a very convenient group of old men yelling at clouds. And it's very convenient. And they're not serious. They're not serious. They've got their truth that is at odds with the prevailing truth of U.S. society. And with their knowledge of this truth, they have blinded themselves. They have blinded themselves with their little truth. They exist as the permanent, useful opposition, the lightning rod for dissidents, the isolated, the release valve, the isolated protest cage, the convenient vehicle for channeling dissent. That's where they exist. But we strive to be something more than that. We strive to actually dismantle Western capitalism and imperialism. We strive to do something more than that. I wrote a whole book, Where is America Going? Explaining to you what is wrong in U.S. society right now, why the political crisis has come out of the economic crisis, who is the main danger, and laying out a vision for how we can get out of this mess. I wrote this book. This book's gotten quite a few good reviews. Go and read it. Over 200 copies have sold already. This book will help you understand what's actually going on right now. But I was able to write this book because I broke out of the dualistic mindset. I realized that the society around me was full of lies, but I didn't just dwell on that. I got beyond that. I got to another stage of things, and I realized that our movement has a lot of problems too. And I realized that the Soviet Union fell for a reason, and I realized that China has had great success for a reason, and Bolivarian socialism has had great success for a reason, and I realized American communist movements, the American Communist movement has been very weak and isolated for a long time for a reason. and that socialists around the world have won because they operated differently. And there is a real process happening in this country. There are real divisions in the ruling class. There is a layer of U.S. society that is very alienated right now, that is at odds with the Pentagon, with the FBI, with the deep state, and with the ultra monopolies. And there's some real shit we could do and really be relevant. And I wrote this book. I'm trying to get you on these streams to think the way I'm thinking. I'm trying to get you to understand the processes of thinking about this with depth. And those are my opening remarks for tonight, and I hope they were somewhat enlightening. I came at this from a different angle than I usually come at things, but those are my opening remarks for tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I am going to do the roll call, and after that, we are going to watch John McCarthy and his intervention, and my own intervention too, on the recent Uhuru call. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? And if you have any super chats, send them my way, because I'm going to start answering super chats here in a minute. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Kinky liked the opening remarks. Crazy opening remarks, and she loved them. Great. Ryan in Kansas City. Kansas City, here I come. They got some crazy little women there. I probably can't sing that, right? It's probably copyrighted. Anyway, Rupert in England. Ryan in Oakland. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox. Jonathan C. in Los Angeles. UP of Michigan. South Georgia. Claire. Welcome, Claire. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Zach Brunch in Virginia, Jamie in St. Paul, Minnesota, Clinton Fraser in South London, Catalonia, Spain, says great remarks. Thank you. Oakland, Psyop, Heidi in Edinburgh, Colin in Greensboro, Patch in Arizona, Ontario, Canada, Briggy, shout out to you, Briggy, in PA, Pennsylvania. James is in Canada. Anthony is in Detroit. Balthazar is in Oakland. Clove is in Seattle. Welcome to Seattle, Clove. Phil Sang in Miami, Planet Fitness. Very good. You're working out late at night, huh? Oh, Terry Strange is in Portland, Oregon. Go subscribe to Terry's channel. I've been watching Terry for years, by the way. Terry is amazing. I remember years ago, Terry used to be Bolshevik chick. She was on there reading Marx and Lenin books and stuff on her stream. I've been on Terry's stream. Go and subscribe. She's a great voice out of Portland. And I hope that our Portland CPI people can connect with you, Terry, because some of them have actually started watching your channel. You got local fans now, thanks to the Center for Political Innovation. So go subscribe to Terry's channel, Terry Strange. So there we go. Gonzalo from Argentina is a big fan. Well, thank you, Gonzalo. I appreciate it. I'm glad that you're a big fan. That's a very kind super chat you just sent me there. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Cece from Seattle. Mariah says, do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. John 14:27. Some scripture there. Very, very good. Very, 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 very good. Very good. Names and locations. How do you feel about RFK Jr.? All right. Zephyr in Oregon. Micah in Las Vegas. Alex from Brazil. Rob from Florida. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Limassol in Cyprus. Welcome. Kieran from San Diego. Welcome, Kieran from San Diego. John McCarthy in Chicago. We're about to watch John here. Fremont, California. Kieran from San Diego. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to do the share screen thing because I can't upload the video because the video is too big and I haven't had a chance to cut it. So we're going to do the share screen thing, and I'm going to put, what is it? I'm going to put the window. Yeah, here we go. Drop the charges against Uhuru. This is from Uhuru, the Uhuru movement's recent anti-FBI repression call. And you're going to hear from me, and you're also going to hear from John McCarthy. We were on there representing the Center for Political Innovation. We are doing everything we can to support the Uhuru movement right now. So there we go. So here we go. Here we go.
Shout out your names. Many are anonymous donations, so I can't thank all of the anonymous donors enough during this period as well. So next, I want to bring up who I'm very excited to also have here with us today is Caleb Maupin, who is here with us with the Center for Political Innovation. Thank you for being on, Caleb. We have a video that we're going to watch of your statement, and then we're also going to hear from John McCarthy, who is also with CPI. And John, you can follow up right after we hear from Caleb's statement. So while that video is being queued up, all right, we're in place. Thank you, Comrade Uhuru.
On behalf of the Center for Political Innovation, I wish to extend our full support and unequivocal solidarity to the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman O'Malley, and all of the individuals facing criminal charges. This indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice is nothing but an attempt to stifle freedom of speech, to suppress political activity, and to persecute those bold enough to question and expose the lies being told to justify sending more weapons to Ukraine and bringing the world closer to the danger of a new world war. And under these circumstances, we call on all forces to offer the same unequivocal support and rally in the defense of those being unfairly, unjustly, and immorally persecuted by the American government.
Hello?
Uhuru, John?
Yes, hi.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm also with CPI. I'm in unity with everything that Caleb has just said. I realize they're not probably watching us live, but I wanted to use my time to challenge the people running against Joe Biden to join with us in demanding that he drop these ridiculous charges. Marianne Williamson, some of the most powerful and beautiful arguments I've ever heard for reparations have been in your speeches. You made it an issue in the last campaign, but then the FBI declares that reparations are some kind of a Russian plot, and all of a sudden you can't find your voice. I guess because now supposedly being against the FBI is right-wing, they say. Even though the number one purpose of the FBI, its number one goal since it was founded has been to decapitate the fight for Black liberation. You cannot be for reparations and for the FBI at the same time. The two forces are at war, and your speeches are real pretty and everything, but we need you to take a side and join this war and fight on our side. RFK Jr., the same thing. We appreciate the fact that you've spoken out for Julian Assange, but as his brother and his father have pointed out, the Julian Assange case and the Uhuru 3 case are the same fight. They're a fight to defend free speech at a time when we desperately need free speech in order to stop a nuclear war between Russia and the United States, a war that would destroy all life. So if the people who murdered your father and your uncle are using this case, the prosecution of the Uhuru 3, to try to murder free speech. And one of the best ways that you could get revenge on them is to join our fight to make sure that they do not succeed. So, Bobby Jr., Marianne, please, we need you to hold a joint press conference demanding that President Joe Biden drop this ridiculous prosecution. And I'll say this, if he refuses and the Democrats nominate him anyway, there will not be another Democratic president for the rest of this century. I promise. Uhuru.
Uhuru, John. I just want to really appreciate that statement, and a few things that you said that I just want to reiterate and take this time to just kind of let the people know what's happening, because this is our ability to be able to talk to those people who need to know what's happening. So I want to appreciate you for just pulling people into the fire, as well. And I wanted to also say what you mentioned about they may not be watching this live. One, I wanted to state where people are tuning in from, but to also make the point that those who they are watching live, we don't see them on the air anymore. And we can remember recently Tucker Carlson or something, Tucker Carlson, I think show was recently canceled after covering this. And so we have to understand that this is not, it's an attack on the right to freedom of speech. So I just, go look that up. There's probably all these reasons for why it was canceled, but we understand why, because it's not that they don't even want this to be out there in the world. This system, this colonial mode of production, which we can see through its face of the FBI and the US government, they don't want people to know what the African People's Socialist Party thinks. They don't want people to know what freedom of thought. This is the thought crimes that we're talking about. So it's very important that you made that call. And I want to appreciate those who are tuning in with us. We have people tuning in from San Diego, California, from Brooklyn, New York. We want to appreciate you for being here. Chicago, through our CPI comrades, and other places throughout Illinois, Tampa, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Inner Grove Heights, Minnesota, Houston, Texas, the United Kingdom, Oakland, California, Battle Creek, Michigan, Manhattan, New York, Ecuador, Miami, Florida, Boston, Massachusetts, San Mateo, San Diego, or California, St. Petersburg, Florida, New York, and Newark, New Jersey.
All right. So that was a great intervention by John McCarthy at the recent Uhuru call. Great work, John. We'll be clipping that separately for the YouTube channel. I just wanted to show it here on the stream. And I noticed that there were a few super chats that came in. So don't worry, you have not been forgotten. You haven't been forgotten. Super chats that came in here. Getting ready. Hold on. All right. So we got, is obesity in the U.S. a Bonapartist scheme? That's an interesting one. And then we got, is Tucker Carlson capitalist in your opinion? All right. And then we got, you killed it on tour of duty. Keep it up, Caleb. Thank you. Doing the best I can. Thank you, Terry. And that's a great YouTube channel. All right. So, okay. So now I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. And like I said, those of you watching right now, right, there's usually about, between 1,000 and 2,000 people who watch these streams at some point. Sometimes it's closer to 2,000, sometimes it's closer to 1,000. But if you look at the unique view count, it's usually somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 individual viewers. But you 163 people watching right now, have a very, 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 very special privilege, because you're watching this live and you have the ability to ask me questions and influence what I talk about. Other people who watch this afterwards have no ability to interfere with it. But you, by sending me a super chat right now, you can make this show serve you. You can create this show in your own image. You have the ability to be godlike right now. Just as God created man in his own image, you can craft this show to be in your own image by sending a super chat and getting me talking, just like the Tanky did. Do you think the U.S. is the world's sole imperialist power? Allied governments are essentially satellites, or is this a country that exerts independent sphere of influence? Good question. All righty. Okie dokie. So on that note, keep that in mind, folks. You have the ability to craft this show how you want it to go. You are part of you're a minority of people who watch this. It's a small percentage, like 10% of the people who are going to watch this are watching right now. And you guys watching right now, you are the elite 10% with the ability to nudge this show how you want it to go. So send me a super chat and get the show to go the way you want it to go. First question: are millennials and Zoomers a lost generation? What do you mean by lost generation? When you say that, I assume that that is an allusion to the lost generation writers. John Steinbeck, John Dos Passos, who else? Who was the other one? Gertrude Stein. Who else? Oh God, the old Robert Hemingway. What was his name? Yeah, Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway. Right? That the 1930s novelists, the big novelists of the 1930s, F. Scott Fitzgerald, are referred to as the lost generation because they came into prominence. Ernest Hemingway, yeah. They came into prominence after World War I in a period of despair and in the Great Depression, in which the economy was falling apart. Now, F. Scott Fitzgerald came into prominence. Some of them came into prominence a little bit beforehand, but they were the lost generation. That's why they're called that. After World War I, you had the Roaring 20s, then you had the Great Depression, and they were the ones who wrote the big books during those years that were years of despair, historical pessimism, etc. Some people don't even include Steinbeck in that, because Steinbeck he wrote his early writing was from that lost generation, but then Grapes of Wrath was 1939, and by the mid 30s, by the time we were in the lead up to World War II, that kind of pessimism, right? The tone of the 1920s was kind of, everyone was partying, but they'd kind of lost hope, and that comes across in a lot of F. Scott Fitzgerald's books. It's, I think, and who was it? Eugene O'Neill, the playwright, he's associated with these people, right? And his pipe dreams, that, his plays are about people that have fantasies, like the Iceman Cometh. Did he write The Iceman Cometh? But it's like pipe dreams that are getting decepted. Eugene O'Neill, and it's like all the characters in his plays have these kind of fantasies, and they're all getting, torn apart. And F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? It's, The Great Gatsby. The guy has spent his life chasing a girl, and she's not worthy of him, and it was all a lie, and he falls apart. You can't create the past, and it's this kind of these novels that are kind of dark and pessimistic, because it's like America, the American dream, all the hope was all a lie. World War I happened. In the 1920s, we're partying to try and forget it. And in the 1930s, we're all starving on the streets. But by the time the Popular Front rolled around, we're talking like 1935, Seventh World Congress of the Communist International, when fascism was on the rise in Europe, and when, the Popular Front and Roosevelt were going, and the communists were rising to fight them. At that point, literature and all that took a very different tone, and it took a very modernist tone. So people associate, the lost generation of writers, that tends to be this kind of pessimism about modernity that you get from middle-class writers in the 1920s and the first half of the 1930s. That's what that generally refers to. So would you say that Zoomers and millennials are also a lost generation? I guess you could say that. Because we're dealing with an economic crisis. So there's that. You could say that because there's a lot of pessimism in the air. So I guess you could say that. I don't get that same vibe from a lot of the art. I don't get that same. I don't get the same pessimism from the art these days. It's a different tone, right? It's a very, very different tone. A very, very different tone. I don't get the same vibe from it. You know, the pessimism. What's interesting is a lot of those writers, right? A lot of those writers that are from that lost generation, Eugene O'Neill, John Dos Passos, Max Eastman, oh good. A lot of those people were like communists in the 1920s. And then as communism started getting popular, they became Trotskyites or conservatives or fascists. It's actually kind of interesting. Steinbeck, but then again, Steinbeck, they don't put him in the same category. Hemingway's politics remained good. He remained kind of a communist sympathizer. But a lot of these people, F. Scott Fitzgerald, John Dos Passos especially, John Dos Passos really went to the right. Steinbeck didn't go to the right until the 1950s. But a lot of these people, it was a little bit weird. They kind of missed the boat. They were into communism when it wasn't popular. They were into communism during the dark years of the 1920s when the Soviet Union was this obscure place with this obscure ideology. The capitalist economy hadn't collapsed yet. The Soviet Union hadn't really started industrializing yet. And they were interested in communism in this vague kind of way because they were alienated. But then when the Soviet Union started rapidly industrializing, their views suddenly shifted. They didn't want to be associated with something that seemed to have steam and energy. Yeah, the lost generation of writers. That's interesting. It's an interesting parallel. I can see the pessimism being similar. I can see the disillusionment and the economic collapse being similar. I kind of get what you're getting at. Let me just put it that way. I wouldn't say it's an exact copy, but I can see a similar problems, I guess, in a different time. I mean, things have changed so much. The culture, information technology. So if Trump can be sympathetic to the Russian Federation and the DPRK, why can't he be sympathetic to China? I don't know if I wouldn't call Trump sympathetic to Russia or DPRK. Trump just doesn't favor escalation with Russia, and he doesn't favor escalation with North Korea. He wants a more diplomatic approach to dealing with both of those countries. But, I think he wants it for his own reasons. I mean, with North Korea, it was very much that was one faction of the ruling class that just wanted that, right? And Mike Pompeo seemed to be with him. John Bolton seemed to be against him. Tell us more about the lady that introduced you to communism. I don't know what you're talking about. No lady introduced me to communism. That's just a weird thing. The lady that introduced you to communism and how that went? Huh? I don't know. Combate, if you want to follow up with that, by all means, please do so. I have no idea what you're talking about. I did talk about how I got into communism in my opening stream, and it did not involve a lady. It did not involve a lady. But there you go. There you go. But I think that Donald Trump is sympathetic to, he wants more diplomacy with Russia and North Korea. But he also was more confrontational toward Cuba and Venezuela and Iran. No, I was talking about an old school communist lady that I met years later, but she's not the one who introduced me to communism. Okay, I'll talk about that. I can talk about that. All right. I know what you mean. Got it. Now, she didn't introduce me to communism, but I learned a huge amount from her. I'm writing it down, and I'll tell you all about her later. That's the confusion, right? She's not right. That's the confusion. Now we got it. Yeah, the old lady who taught me a lot of communist principles. All right. Very good. All right. So Donald Trump represents one particular faction that is willing to be more negotiating with Russia, is willing to negotiate more with DPRK. And I think for whatever reason, Trump has learned that demagogy against China is good for his, his audience. His audience wants to hear that. Honestly, though, I think Trump would be more willing to de-escalate, because I think Trump is critical of Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan. And that I think Trump's approach overall is the American people don't want a war. So Trump sees that the establishment wants a war, but the American people don't. And so he sees that as a way to give himself power, right? Trump is a Bonapartist, and it's a Bonapartist move. He needs people to back him against the American political establishment so he can assert his agenda. And the American people don't want a war, and the political establishment needs a war for their own reasons. So I think, honestly, as much as Trump likes to beat his chest and yell against China, because I think a lot of the people that he's aligned with are more involved in industrial production. My Pillow, right? I'm sure they make a lot of pillows in China. So My Pillow hates China, and Hobby Lobby, and and all of that. And I know Trump had a very close relationship with Apple. Right. And Apple sees Huawei Technologies as their main competitor. And, was it Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, used to hang out at the White House, even though Apple opposed Trump as a company. The CEO of Apple and Trump were really close, and they wanted to crush Huawei Technologies together. And that I think, though, at the end of the day, Trump is going to be less willing to do things like what Nancy Pelosi did in Taiwan and stuff, because he knows the American people don't want that. They don't want a war. And that Donald Trump, while he likes to play the anti-China card more than the anti-Russia card in his rhetoric, I think, honestly, Trump would be less hawkish with China. That's the truth. And you'll notice that with Venezuela, Trump was pandering really, really hard to the Venezuelan, the Miami Cuban right-wing crowd. They just kept pushing it. And Trump is the one who ultimately said, I'm sick of talking about Venezuela, and backed away from it. They wanted to keep going. I mean, they were really escalating against Venezuela at one point, and Marco Rubio and all of them were down there, and they lit the food caravan on fire and all this stuff. And then it just went flat. Trump he murdered Qasem Soleimani, took an anti-Iranian position, mainly because he's pandering to the Netanyahu crowd in Israel. And, that fear of Iran, anti-Iran tensions is part of the base of Netanyahu and his Bonapartism. So there you go. Do you know the history professor Pablo Borda? He has a history channel. No, I don't. What is your opinion of Peronism? Peronism is progressive. I mean, as a movement, obviously it's a form of Bonapartism, but it was a form of Bonapartism that positioned itself in an anti-imperialist way. Now, Peron was not a Marxist, not a communist, and there were times that he was with the imperialists. He went back and forth, but overall, overwhelmingly, Peronism had an anti-imperialist character and a socialist character. But it's not Marxism, it's not socialism, and it's not fully socialism. It's Bonapartism. It's like Louis Bonaparte. It's left anti-imperialist Bonapartism. That's how I would characterize Peronism. Juan Perón said Fidel Castro was one of the greatest Peronists who'd ever lived. That Che Guevara was a great Peronist. I mean, Peronism has a very, very socialistic side to it, but it's not fully there, right? It's not really completely there. It's just kind of calling for the greatness of the country and such. It's a kind of Bonapartist anti-imperialism, I guess. It's not fully socialist, didn't create a socialist society in Argentina. But it was sympathetic to socialist societies, and it was willing to align with the Soviet Union and Cuba when necessary. It admired the political strength of socialist movements. So, yeah, it's a uniquely Argentine phenomenon. It's not, I wouldn't say it's completely socialistic. It's a class collaborationist United Front movement that never fully became a workers' movement. Right? You could imagine historical circumstances where Perón would lead Argentina to socialism. You can imagine circumstances where, Perón is facing ouster by the United States, and the communist labor unions have his back, and the Soviet Union starts pouring investment heavily into Argentina, where Juan Perón would become a Fidel Castro of Argentina. But that's just not how the class forces aligned, right? And that's ultimately, when it gets down to it, it's not, people want to find the answer in ideology. It's not the ideology. It's how things line up, and that things in Argentina just never lined up to push Argentina fully into the socialist camp, right? That there was a class collaborationist, anti-imperialist kind of popular front, but it just never, the forces never aligned to push it damn mic, this Blue Yeti mic. This is so annoying. So annoying that, in Cuba, you'll notice that things did line up. That Fidel, he came to power. He wanted to build a new Cuba. He had been very heavily influenced by Marxism, and as he started nationalizing things, the Soviet Union became his ally, the USA became his enemy, and one thing led to another, and Cuba, here we go. Cuba ended up going into the socialist camp, but there are other leaders. I mean, Allende called himself a Marxist. Salvador Allende called himself a Marxist. And believed in Marxism, was a friend of Fidel Castro, and he took power. He was the president preaching Marxism, but he ultimately couldn't take Chile to socialism, right? And he ended up getting overthrown in a coup, right? And that these things happen, right? That it's really about the balance of forces. Is the working class and the socialist camp having the upper hand? Is the ruling class all lining up? I mean, the reason Hugo Chavez and Venezuela went to socialism, originally, Hugo Chavez took power as kind of a bourgeois nationalist. He wasn't for capitalism or socialism, he said. He was for whatever was best for Venezuela. But then you'll notice that what happened, that there was a coup against him, and the labor unions supported him, and alliance with Cuba became really important, and Chinese investment, and the oil prices rose, and things led to another, and the way forces aligned pushed Venezuela and the Bolivarian coalition all the way to socialism. And that's what happened. And that if you look at it, it's about the alignment of forces. It's a chess game, and it's a push and pull, right? And, and that's the imperialists are on one side, and the anti-imperialist forces, the national bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie, and the working class are on the other side. The working class is ultimately who can make it go to socialism. And the petty bourgeoisie and the national bourgeoisie need the working class because they're too weak to fight the big imperialist bourgeoisie on their own. So there becomes, the petty bourgeoisie and the national bourgeoisie have to empower the working class to have their back. Che Guevara wrote about this. So there becomes a push and a pull. But in some cases, Brazil's a great example. Lula da Silva is not going to go fully to socialism. He's not, right? The petty bourgeoisie, the national bourgeoisie of Brazil is strong enough that he can call himself a social democrat or whatever. But Brazil is never going to become a fully socialist, anti-imperialist country. Never going to happen, right? But Venezuela, the way things lined up, they went that way, right? And that ultimately the working class, the proletariat, is what pushes you to socialism. When the proletariat becomes the dominant class in the coalition, or a Marxist organization, in China it was a communist party with a proletarian ideology that had organized the peasantry and the working class, they became the dominant force in the anti-imperialist United Front. That's what takes the country to socialism. And that just never happened in Argentina. Perón aligned himself with the communists, but other times he was hostile to the communists. And there was enough of a middle class and different forces, and it just never lined up that way. All right, next question. When people are proven wrong, their brain interprets it as pain. Liberals will never admit Russiagate was wrong. That's true. Well, no one ever wants to hear that they're wrong. I mean, that's what Garland Nixon's talk at the recent CPI conference was about. No one ever wants to admit that they're wrong. People don't want to hear they're wrong. So it's like you got to learn to just gradually feed people little bits of truth, give it to them what sticks. The only bigger bullshit than Russiagate is Russiagate 2.0 against Uhuru. Exactly. And it's like at this point, with Russiagate being bullshit, how can they keep this going? I mean, they at this point, everyone admits that what they did with Trump and Russiagate was bullshit. So now they're trying to say that it's true about a group of black activists in Florida. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this case should be on the front page of every newspaper. And if they can do this to them, they can do it to anybody. That's why that case is so important. That's why I have their defense fund down below. That's why CPI is doing everything it can to support the Uhuru movement right now. Thank you, John. All right. What about Ukraine Gate? Oliver Stone showed that Ukraine really wanted Hillary to win. It's not just Ukraine. Many countries around the world, I mean, have their interests. I mean, it's very clear the Miami Cubans, the Cuban exiles, they are very much Republicans. So, Cuba generally feels that Democrats are nicer to them. I mean, so did Cuba meddle in all of our elections? Of course not. Right? I mean, of course not. Cuba's not influencing the American elections, but does Cuba feel the Democrats are better? Sure. Does Cuba orient, their allies to support the Democrats? Sure. But does that mean that, Cuba meddled in our elections? No. Israel generally, for the most part, Israel feels Republicans are better. Now, that has gotten a little bit weird in the Trump years. Israel's heavily divided with the Netanyahu people. But really, since the 80s, the feeling in Israel has largely been Republicans are better for Israel than Democrats. So is Israel meddling in our elections? Well, there's this huge lobby, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, and there's a huge amount of Israeli influence in American politics. And even now, from both sides, the Likud wing is very for Trump. Sheldon Adelson, who's a huge, hugely invested in Israel, was a huge Trump supporter. So did Sheldon Adelson and Likud rig it for Trump? No. Did they influence? No. They were one faction. Did the Haganah, the Israeli Labor Party, did they rig it for Biden? No. I mean, it's just like, it's such a stupid conversation. The more you look into it, it's just stupid. It's just stupid. Yes, every country in the world has interests in the United States, does business over here. And yes, many countries feel that one side is better for them than the other. And that doesn't mean there's a vast foreign conspiracy that's rigging our elections. And it's such a stupid thing. And the USA does this in every country in the world. The USA and American businesses and American investment and who America lets have bank accounts over here and the sanctions the USA imposes have results in elections all over the planet. So give me a break. Give me a break. All right. How do you feel about RFK Jr.? I'm glad he's running. I don't agree with a lot of things he's said about climate change, but I do agree with his, criticism of Dr. Fauci and that he's criticized Dr. Fauci. I read his book. We're not going to get into detail about that, but, I like that. And I do agree with him being critical of U.S. foreign policy and the wars and the police state and supporting Julian Assange. So I'm glad he's running. I don't endorse any candidate. The Center for Political Innovation is nonpartisan. We don't endorse any candidates. We don't campaign for anybody, but I'm happy he's running and I want to see the results of his campaign. All right. Is obesity in the U.S. a Bonapartist scheme? No, it's largely a result of the free market. Obesity in the United States is largely a result of the fact that corporations want you to buy their products. And they worked really, really hard to make their French fries at McDonald's taste really good and to make to make you want to buy. It's the free market in action, right? They want you to buy the product and they want to make it as cheap as possible. They want to maximize their profit. And so they make it taste really good and they come up with all kinds of preservatives and all kinds of stuff to make it cheaper for them to produce it and taste really good. And one thing leads to another. And I will say with food, I don't eat well. It's part of the reason I exercise. I don't eat like I should. And I am very susceptible to this. But if you go to a lot of other countries, food doesn't taste the same. Food is a lot blander in other countries because people just don't have this need the way we do. In America, the food, and I believe it's a result of the free market, food has gotten to be such a commercial thing that they're trying to up the ante and make the taste, maximize the taste on everything. You go to other countries, chicken it still tastes like chicken, but it's milder, right? The fruits taste differently. The food taste, food tastes differently in other places because it's not as commercialized. And I think at the end of the day, the obesity in the United States is largely just that, fast food sells. The other thing that no one wants to talk about, and I know about this, right? I've got family from the South. I'll just acknowledge this. This is not about any of my relatives or anything, but it's, I would go and visit my grandparents in the South and in Missouri. And, it's just a fact. Anyone who's from the U.S. South knows people in the South are more obese than people in the North and in the West Coast, right? It's just a fact, right? You go down to Mississippi and Alabama and Florida and Georgia and North Dakota and North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, people are fatter down there. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of things. The main thing is that lower income people tend to be more obese because the food that you have access to in lower income areas tends to be because of that. But also culturally, and this is very interesting, culturally in the South, there was a feeling that it was a good thing to be fat. Now, I don't know if you know this, but, Huey Long was not actually that heavy. But the way he speaks, if you watch Huey Long speak, he's holding his body. He's trying to give the illusion that he's fat. Right? And you look at like Southern populists, they're all big fat guys because in the South, there was a feeling that big fat guys, that's a big, strong man, right? You're bulking up, right? And if you go back, especially before World War II, but even up in like the 50s and 60s, there was a feeling that, a big man was a fat man. You wanted a big fat guy, right? That's what you wanted, and if a guy didn't have, a stomach on him, if a guy didn't have hadn't bulked up, he was a weak man. You didn't want a small guy. You wanted a big man, that's what people wanted. And especially politicians, the stereotype of a Southern populist, right, is a big fat man who stands up and is fighting for the common man. That's the stereotype of a Southern populist, right? You think about George Wallace, right? George Wallace, the Southern populist demagogue, he was a big fat man, right? Wasn't he? Let's look at a picture. George Wallace, every time I think of George Wallace, you listen to him talk, I think of big fat Southern guy, right? He was this big demagogic governor. He wasn't that fat, but, that was a feeling, right? Culturally in the South, people wanted a big fat man, right? That's what people wanted. And, that was the feeling in the South. But anyway, that's changed culturally, right? Now, but Southern food tends to be more fattening, more greasy, right? And then you have more poverty in the South, which is true. There's a lot more poverty in Southern states, and that's a legacy of slavery. Slavery held back economic development. That's what that's about. The Confederacy. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the Confederacy, in their actual Constitution of the Confederate States of the United States of America, it forbid technological progress. It was against technological development. Slavery held the South back from industrialization. All the industrial cities, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Minneapolis, they're all in the North. Because in the South, the South was largely not industrial because of slavery. And then after that, the tenant farm system. And so because of that, the Southern states are still heavily impoverished, and the military is there in the South because poor people tend to fight in the military, and because the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, is down there. And so the South, you tend to have a lot of poor people, white and black. And so you have a lot of heavier people in the South. The South is heavier than the rest of the country. And on top of that, the South is much more militarized, right? And they talk about Southern culture. It's got a lot of Southern families. Everyone goes into the military. It's just kind of a lot of families from Georgia, a lot of families from Alabama. Everyone in the military, everyone in the family goes into the military. The whole family, it's just kind of expected that young men join the military, right? You go to certain parts of the South, the military is just a really big influence on the culture, right? The ROTC clubs in the school, and, the military bases being around in the area. And, the South is culturally quite different from the rest of the United States. You have a lot more of a military influence, and you have a lot lower income folks. It's much more working class. I talk about Southern culture. There's a lot of different things about the United States. And, it's interesting because I'm not from the South. My father is from the South, but even he is from like the part of Missouri they call Little Dixie. So he's not even really from the South. He's from like Southern Missouri, which is technically not even the South, right? It's near Arkansas. Arkansas is the South. So, and it's weird because it's like, I've thought a lot about these kind of things, right? And it's like, I don't know the West. I really don't know the West Coast very well, right? I don't know the West Coast very well. But it's like I realized a few years ago that I knew nothing about Mormonism because Mormonism was not a thing. right? In Ohio, there was like one little Mormon church, and it wasn't a thing. But if you go to Oregon, you go to Idaho, you go to Utah, you go to Arizona, Mormonism is a really big deal out there. Well, that's a cultural factor, right? And especially when you talk about FBI and CIA, a lot of Mormons there, a lot of Mormons in those agencies, right? Mormonism is a really big aspect of the American deep state, and it's a really big aspect of American culture. But if you're from the Midwest, like I am, or even if you're from the South, you wouldn't know that because it's marginal in those areas. Now, it exists. It's a religion in the United States, but in those areas, it is a really big part of the culture, and it influences culture. Mormons, part of their tradition is that every Friday night, the family stays together, right? The family stays together and they play board games with each other, right? That's a big part of Mormon. That's like something that they do. Also, Mormons, from what I understand, it's like, don't they skip a meal and like donate the money they would have eaten with to like a food warehouse or something? I don't know. There's different like traditions that you wouldn't know about that are rooted in Mormonism. And, it's interesting because it's like, if you watch, you watch TV advertisements for churches and such. I remember seeing TV advertisements for the Catholic Church and going, what? Because it's like, usually if TV advertisements are trying to advertise a religion, they're like, this is a really great religion, you should check it out. But the Catholic Church, I remember the ads they do are like, come home, come back to the Catholic Church. Why? Because people are Catholic for ethnic reasons, usually. People are Catholic because they're Irish, because they're Italian, because they're Latin, from South America. That's why they tend to be Catholic. So the Catholic Church, they put an ad on TV. They don't say convert to Catholicism, it's a great religion. They say come back, come home, right? They're appealing to your familiarity because you grew up with it because of your ethnicity, right? So, and then you could argue that there are a lot of people, Judaism, many people recognize, is not simply a religion, it's also cultural, right? There are many people that are atheists that very much identify with Jewish culture, a Jewish sense of humor, etc., right? And that Catholicism is similar in that way. One can be culturally Catholic, right? And I would argue that you can also be culturally Mormon. I would argue that if you go to the Pacific Northwest, you go to Utah, there are ways that one can be an atheist, one can never have walked into a Mormon church in their life, but be culturally Mormon. I would argue there's cultural Mormonism, just like there's cultural Judaism, cultural Catholicism is. These things are very important, right? And you don't think that they're important. You don't think that, but it is, right? If you're raised in a religion and once a week for your entire childhood, you're going and getting religious indoctrination. And in some cases, like in my case, it was more than once a week, right? It was much more than once a week. It's going to have an influence on how you think about things. It's going to have an influence on how you perceive the world and such. And that, people can be completely atheistic, kind of stopped going to church when they moved out of their parents' house, and still have a very Catholic influence on the way that they think about things. People can be very secular, but they still talk about how they feel culturally Jewish, right? And that these things are important to pay attention to. These things are very important to pay attention to. Many people argue that the reason Marx was always writing polemics. What is the Talmud? It's polemics. It's rabbis arguing with each other. Well, the Bible is not like that. The Bible tends to be, you have the Old Testament, which is narrative. You have the Gospels that are narratives. And then you have these manifestos that are written to cities, the epistles, right? So the Bible is a very narrative style. But the Talmud, you read the Talmud, it's a rabbi here is arguing. He says, you're wrong on this point, blah, 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 blah. And then someone writes back, you're wrong on this point. You read the Talmud, it's a polemic. Well, Marx writes in a polemical style. And many people argue that there's a Talmudic influence, even though Marx was an atheist. His family was forcibly converted to Lutheranism when he was 14, and he was an atheist, and he wrote a very anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic essay when he was in his 20s that you can read. It's very he wrote an essay that was pretty intensely hostile to the Jewish religion. Well, let me just put it that way. He wrote that, but that didn't stop Marx from writing in a largely Talmudic polemical style. And that's important to pay attention to. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's Marx, and if you were from a background that Marx was like, you would probably relate to that kind of writing more. Engels, though, was from a different background. So Engels' writing is not largely polemical. Engels writes largely in a in a narrative style, and some people find Engels' writing easier to read. And you'll notice a similar thing about Freud and Jung, right? Carl Jung was from a Christian background. He wrote a certain way. Freud writes a very different way, and that doesn't say anything about their ideas. It's just the way they learned to communicate was largely, especially back then when there was no TV or anything like that. One's rhetorical style, their style of speaking, is going to be heavily influenced by one's religious beliefs. And these are important things. And we don't realize how much these things have an influence on us. We don't realize that. You think about familiarity. I will admit I have a soft spot for Mike Huckabee. I do. I like hearing Mike Huckabee talk. I do, right? And there are other people I know, his voice is nails on a chalkboard to them. They're just like, why would anyone like that? Well, I know why I like Mike Huckabee. Because my dad's family is from Missouri, the part of Missouri that borders Arkansas, that southern small town man. I have affection for that accent and that mannerism, that kind of politeness, that, self-defacing humor, that, that politeness, that I have affection for it. I don't agree with him politically, but when I hear Mike Huckabee talk, I like that. Other people hear Mike Huckabee talk, it's nails on a chalkboard. There are certain accents. I'm not even going to say what they are on here because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. That I hear, there's certain parts of the country that people are from, and those accents to me are nails on a chalkboard. I hear people from certain regions talk, and especially if it's a really intense accent, it really doesn't appeal to me. But has nothing to do with whether that accent is good or bad. If I had grown up in a different part of the country, a certain accent would appeal to me. I like Mike Huckabee talk because of my background, because of my familiarity, right? It's like, if you're at a concert, right? If you're at a concert and they start playing a song that it lights you up, right? Because it's familiar to you. Right? If you're at a parade and the marching band goes by and then they start playing one of your favorite songs, you go, I know that tune, and the familiarity lights you up. We're all like that, right? But we don't realize it to some degree or other, right? We have to realize these things. And so if you grew up culturally Catholic, culturally Jewish, culturally Mormon, culturally mainline Protestant, WASP, I don't know what, these things all have an influence. They all have an influence. Thoughts on Trump's Ukraine comments? Okay, wrote it down. So there you go. Anyway, I don't know how we got on that. Is Tucker Carlson a capitalist in your opinion? Yeah, of course he is. He's not a socialist. He doesn't believe in socialism. He's an advocate of free market capitalism. He's a conservative, but he's a conservative with a paleo-conservative influence. He's influenced by Pat Buchanan, people like that. And because politics in America is becoming more divided and stuff, he's drifted into a more anti-war and more anti-establishment way. And he's more of a paleo-conservative, I would argue. He reminds me of Pat Buchanan, right? And because of the Trump thing and because of divisions in the ruling class, he's drifted into a more anti-war and right-wing populist direction, I would argue. Is he a capitalist? Sure, he believes in capitalism. He's not a socialist in any conceivable way. But he might, there was that interview he did with Ben Shapiro where he was talking about self-driving cars, and he might start to approach some of the right-wing anti-capitalist stuff. He might approach that. It's from a right-wing place, though. He's not a Marxist in any conceivable way, but I could see him maybe at some point giving play to like trad Catholic critiques of capitalism, I've never heard him go that far, though. That would be a big stretch for him because his audience would lose their mind. I mean, among American conservatives, capitalism is sacred, right? I mean, I think it was Julius Evola, the fascist, the far-right thinker. He critiqued conservatism after World War II. He said conservatism has just degenerated into nothing but the worship of capitalism. And I would largely argue that's what American conservatism has largely become. And if you look at it, I mean, Karl Marx spends the first pages of the Communist Manifesto going over how all the things that are important to conservatives have been destroyed by capitalism. The family, loyalty to one's nation, all of that. I mean, you know, Karl Marx spends the first pages of the Communist Manifesto sounding like a conservative, pointing out the revolutionary role of the bourgeoisie in destroying all the things conservatives seek to preserve. And Julius Evola, the fascist, he points out, he says that, you know, modern conservatism post-World War II just turned into worship of capitalism. And that's largely what American conservatism is. But capitalism in its essence is not conservative. Do you think, you know, conservatives hate pornography? They don't like pornography. Do you think that pornography exists because some communists are sitting there going, yes, how shall we destroy the good moral values of America? I know we shall go and get pornography. No, of course not. Pornography exists to make money, right? Pornography makes billions and billions of dollars. Well, if you're a conservative and you're against pornography, you should realize capitalism is promoting something that's against your values, right? And so there you go. Anyway, next question. Is the USA the world's sole superpower? Are other countries merely satellites? No, I would say the USA is not. I mean, superpower, yes. Power, no. You know, there's French imperialism. There's German imperialism. You know, Britain is a huge wing of the American. I would argue that the most dangerous wing of the American political establishment is thoroughly tied into Britain. I would argue that the British, the British financial interests and the ultra rich in America are almost synonymous. But the French have their interests, the Germans have their interests, the Italians have their interests. Australia and Canada not as much. I think Australia and Canada are a little bit weaker. But there are different interests among the imperialists. Macron, as bad as Macron is, he didn't go along with, the Taiwan stuff. And, he's much more friendly to China. And you can tell that beneath the surface, Germany and France are not as thrilled about the Russia-Ukraine stuff as they kind of pretend to be. But you can tell, there's anger boiling beneath the surface. All right. Thoughts on Golda Meir. Can Zionists be socialists? One could be an advocate of socialism who is confusedly a supporter of Zionism. I mean, one could conceivably be that, but can Zionism, was Israel ever a socialist country? No, you can't have. Israel was always a colonial settler country. It had a lot of social programs, still has a lot of social programs. That's welfare capitalism, and it's a settler country. It's a settler colonial country with a big welfare state. When Israel began, it presented itself like it was going to be some big socialist commune in the desert. You had the kibbutzim, the socialist communities, the utopian communities that were there. They're still there. I mean, they still exist in Israel. You still have kibbutz that exist, but those are not. I mean, those are again. I mean, it's like was Zor. Was that socialism? A bunch of settlers from America went and built some ideal community in what's now Akron, Ohio. I mean, socialism in one city, and not exactly. It was a utopian community. It was an attempt to organize a city, in an egalitarian way. I mean, Israel, yes. When it was started at the beginning, especially, there was a very left-wing edge to Israel. That started to change. 1978, the election of who was it? 1978. It was the election of Menachem Begin in 1978. That was a big turning point because Israel was at odds. Israel always, from the beginning, was at odds with the Arab world. They displaced the Palestinians. They waged many wars against the Arab people. You had the 67 war, which was Israel versus the entire Arab world. But the vanguard of fighting for Israel was Egypt and Iraq and Syria and countries like that. And, Israel put itself against the national liberation movements of the Middle East, right? The Middle Eastern people, the Arabs largely, but also the Iranians, also the Kurds, also other ethnic groups from that region, fighting for national liberation against imperialism, aligning with the Soviet Union. Israel was against them. So Israel, by about 78, it had to start shedding the left-wing, socialist commune in the desert aesthetics and started to just kind of come to terms with, look, we're right-wing. We consider Muslims to be savages who are inferior. We consider ourselves to be an outpost of European civilization. We consider ourselves to be white people. We consider these people around us to be inferior brown people. Those sentiments are very widespread in Israel, right? I believe the Netanyahu wing of Israeli politics is much more explicit about that, but that's just kind of the situation. I mean, it's when you're a settler colonial country, you're going to act like a settler colonial country. And those sentiments are going to be widespread. And Israel is an outpost of Western capitalism and imperialism. But increasingly, Netanyahu and his wing, they do represent a more independent wing that is just for Israel, right? And that's a contradiction. And one pet peeve of mine, I will say, I mean, here you go. You're getting Caleb. I'm in cancel territory again. But one pet peeve of mine is when people make it seem like Israel is somehow an innocent victim. And this is a lot of Marxists do this. And I really got tired of it, especially as the Trump stuff started getting going. But it really bothers me. It annoys me to no end. And I got so tired of it. And, after I was traveling to the Middle East and stuff, my patience for it had just worn out. Among communists who are very anti-Israel, who support the Palestinians, there is this weird, I can't explain it. I called it soft Zionism. Maybe that's not fair because they are anti-Israel. But, if you see a white American, average white American, and he says, I hate black people, what do you call him? You call him a racist because that's racist. You say, that's disgusting. You're racist. However, if you see a Zionist, a Jewish person say, I hate Arab people or I hate Muslims, it's, oh, that's so sad. No, it's not. He's a racist. He's a racist. Why the double standard? And I got so sick of this. Zionists say the most hateful things. They want to outlaw Islam. They think there's a vast conspiracy against them. The whole world is just an anti-Israeli plot. Every crime Israel's committed is actually Hollywood. It's a big false flag to demonize Israel. All Muslims and all people of color are all inferior savages trying to stop Israel or something. And, but they get this like, oh, it's just so sad. Well, you can't call them racist because they actually believe the Arabs are trying to kill them. And it's, and it's this double standard. And that's always annoyed me. It's always annoyed me. And, it's, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say too much more about that, but I've always been annoyed by that, right? That the double standard, and it's ethnic bigotry, right? It's ethnic largely, and it's ethnic tribalism. And it's, when people from my background do something bad, I can forgive them and feel sorry from them. But when people from your background do something bad, Caleb, it's because they're bad people and they need to be shamed. And you should just be shamed, even though you've broken with the racist ideas. It's awful. There's a I don't know, soft Zionism, right? Blatant Zionism is support for Israel, waving the Israeli flag, etc. But there's soft Zionism among American communists. And they say they're against Israel. They'll burn the Israeli flag, but there's just this feeling that, I don't know. There's this, gets me mad. Anyway. And, I'm against any form of ethnic bigotry. I am, right? And, there's different forms of ethnic bigotry out there. So anyway, how did we get on that? What are we talking about? I don't know. Next question. All right. Speaking of anti-Zionist Jews who heroically stood up against Zionism, one of the people who mentored me You asked me about this lady who taught me to be a communist. You said the lady who made me a communist. No, the lady who trained me and taught me so much of what I know was a woman named Frances Dostal. She had been in the Communist Party when she was her parents had been like leaders of the Communist Party when she was a child. She joined the Socialist Workers Party and eventually was a founding member of the Workers' World Party. And I did a lengthy interview with her when I was in college, and I posted it on YouTube. So I'll just send it to you right now. This is like the hour-long interview I did with Frances. It's like an hour-long film I did about her political background. Amazing woman, Jewish, but anti-Israel, very opposed to Zionism, and I learned so much from her. A very kind person, and she understood Marxism. She was a very patient person and a very caring person. And I learned a lot from her. And she had a working class way of talking, and she was Jewish, but she was very anti-Israel, and she had lived in Youngstown, Ohio for most of her life, in Cleveland for many years as well. Just a very great person who I learned a lot from. If you want to watch an hour-long interview with her about her life growing up as a communist in New York City and how she ended up becoming a founding member of the Workers' World Party, go and watch this interview. I'm really honored to have had the political education that she gave me. So there you go. And I learned a lot from her. So there you go. Thoughts on Trump, Ukraine comments, stop dying. That was the right answer. It's a scandal that Donald Trump didn't say, "Oh, I want Ukraine to destroy Russia." And he didn't. He didn't say that, right? He gave the right answer, which is I'm not concerned about winning and losing. I'm concerned with making the war stop. That's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned with making the war stop. That was, what's wrong with that? I think what Donald Trump said was really amazing. What he said was really amazing. So there you go. There you go. All righty. All right, folks, it's almost 1:30 in the morning. And so I'm going to put on the closing music. We'll talk again soon. All right. Surge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.